change your heart, change your life, change the planet.
I use the model of esteem versus efficacy. That we live in a culture that believes that self-esteem, or at least high self-esteem, is valued and should be something that one has. You should have a sense of high self-esteem. I totally disagree, because self-esteem, or at least high self-esteem, is about that inflated left abstraction, an inflated sense of self-value. So inside of your simulation of self or identity, you have a high valuation, but in relation to what? It's completely ungrounded. It's like a paper currency that has been inflated and is no longer linked to an actual amount of gold existing in a vault somewhere. That the paper really has no value anymore, but we say that it does, but it's very, very unstable and fragile. Yeah, so whereas efficacy is about going back to the gold standard. A sense of efficacy is, well, how much gold do I actually have, and what can I do with it? Rather than borrowing more and more money, or printing more and more money, or printing a larger and larger sense of self by doing affirmations and the like, trying to narrate yourself into a greater sense of value, you say, well, I've got this much gold, it's not a lot, but what can I do with it? What can I buy with it? What can I trade with it? Okay, I can trade for these tools. Now I've got these tools and I've got these resources to work with. How can I use these tools to turn those resources into something that I can trade for more gold? And so depression for me is about saying, I'm on the ground now, and therefore I actually have resources that I can work with. But when I'm up in the air, floating above in this abstract left space, how do you work with air? You can't. It's not dense enough. So you've got to be on the ground. That's where the actual resources are. That's where you do the work. That's where you can actually take steps. And when you fall, you're not going to fall very far. So if you take a risk and it doesn't work out, you're only falling, a few inches or a few feet at most. And you're working with the value that you actually possess, which is your efficacy. What can I do with my body and mind? What are my actual skills? And what resources do I have to apply those skills to? And how can I transform that into something of actual greater value? So depression essentially puts me into the space of, this is what I have to work with, let's work with it. And if that's scary, if that's frightening, if that's somehow overwhelming, that's okay. Let's just take smaller steps as I work with it. So if it comes to writing a book or getting a book out there, rather than thinking about writing a book, well, how about writing a chapter? Ooh, that's still too big. How about writing a paragraph? Ooh, that's still too big. How about working with this particular word? How about typing that word and then just seeing what happens when I put that word on the page? What is spontaneously happening when I do that? And I start playing in this kind of a micro space rather than in this larger macro space where there is something called a book. That's an abstraction. There's no such thing as a book, really, when it comes to being a writer. As a reader, I can pick up a book, but as a writer, you don't write a book. You write a single character, and then another one, and then another one. So depression gets me into this space of micro actions. And whenever I find myself afraid, I just make the steps smaller. And then it's like, at some point, you're going to make it so small that your value of gold in the vault is going to be larger than the step you're trying to take. And then you're like, okay, I feel bigger than this step. I felt smaller than the previous step, and that scared me. But now that I made the step smaller, I know that I have enough in reserve, or I have enough confidence to be bigger than this step. So here we go. Boom, done. Got it. What's next? So depression actually allows me to really, really powerfully engage without falling down, because I'm never inflating. I'm never taking steps that are beyond what I can work with. And the joy comes from the actual engagement. The depression is not a joyful state. The depression allows me to engage with what is. And in the process of that engagement, I create joy. I create happiness. So I have plenty of happiness and joy in my day, but it doesn't start that way. I create it. And it's linked to actual value, it's linked to actual accomplishment rather than an imagined accomplishment, which is, a lot of people, they set goals in their mind and then they get all excited because their identity gets attached to the goal rather than the work that needs to be done to achieve the goal.